He's had various jobs as a historian, but the one he's going to talk about today is one that he had. It had to do with the Historical Landmarks Program, and he will explain to you what that's all about.
So I worked for the Park Service Park History Program for many years. In 1981, my supervisor came to me and said, "Hey, Butowski, we need to do a special resource study on the American Space Program. Congress asked for it." Well, this was in June of '81. When did Congress ask for it? They asked for it in September of 1979. Oh, okay. When's it due? It's due at the end of this fiscal year. It's due at the end of September. You have 2 months to do it. Oh, okay. So I'm thinking to myself, wow, this is great. The Park Service came to me, right? Because I'm a fine historian. I know the American Space Program, so they picked me out. No, they didn't pick me out for that reason. The reason they picked me out was that I was base funded from the History Office, and they wouldn't have to pay my salary. That's why they picked me out. All right, so that was the first study I did. This was a reconnaissance survey. And this was just a very quick and dirty look at all the historic resources associated with the American Space Program, the launch pads, whatever. You all remember the space program. You remember, Sputnik, and you remember the first launch of the Explorer satellites. Well, I was looking at the launch pads and the test facilities and the instruments that they used to create these satellites. So I did this one, and I remember I went out there with I had a planner with me, a park planner with me, a structural engineer with me, and Wallace Schirra. Anybody know who Wallace Schirra was? Yeah, he was one of the Mercury astronauts. He was a member of the Park System Advisory Board. It was very handy having Wallace Schirra with you, because with Wallace Schirra you can get into any NASA facility. You just show up and they let you in, and they show you everything. But he used to be, he used to say, "Shh, don't tell anybody who I am," He used to go in incognito. And I thought, why doesn't anybody know who he is? And then one day we showed up at the Alabama Space and Rocket Center, and they had a big sign up there, "Welcome astronaut Wallace Schirra." And like 30,000 people descended on him, and I couldn't talk to him for the rest of the day. So we would go and we would look at these facilities, and I would take photographs of them. And then Rick McCullough and I would go back to our room at night. We start writing this stuff up. We didn't have computers back in 1981. So we would write it up on yellow legal pads. And a lot of times we ran out of the yellow legal pads, so we were using paper bags, brown paper bags. My handwriting's not the best either, neither is Rick's handwriting. And then we would pack it up and send it off to Denver to an editor. And I'll tell you, if you're ever going to do a quick and dirty study, you better have a good editor. And she would take this stuff and turn it into, readable text and format it and put it in a good way that you could look at. In any case, we traveled for about 4 weeks and visited, the Kennedy Space Center, Alabama Space and Rocket Center, the Johnson Space Center. That's all we had time to do. The rest I did by just consulting books. And I wrote it up, and this was the reconnaissance survey. Now this was due October the 1st in the hands of Congress. And we got it done. I got it printed. It was done by October the 1st. And I turned it over to the Park Service and sent it up through lines of command. 10 months later, the Department of the Interior transmitted it to the Congress. Oh, that's the way it went. All right, so we did that. I got that out of the way. The next thing I did, we didn't hear from the Congress. So I decided to do a National Historic Landmark study of Cape Canaveral Air Force Station. And I went down there, and this was a special form I had to do. was about 135 or 140 pages. I detailed the history of Cape Canaveral Air Force Station. This is where all the rockets were going off from. Later became the John F. Kennedy Space Station. So I went down there and I wrote it up. And while I'm down there, I ran into a bunch of contractors. Boy, watch out for the contractors. They did everything they could to sabotage me. What I found out was afterwards, when I finished my study, my NHL study, and I gave it to the Air Force, and I was working its way through channels. And then about a year later, the contractor study showed up. And I looked at the contractor study, and what did the contractors do? They copied my study word for word. Word for word. And they handed it into the Air Force. And what they didn't take from me, they just took from the Air Force, Xeroxed it and put it in their study. And they charged the Air Force $200,000 for that study. And I called the liaison for the Air Force. I said, you guys are idiots. I said, I gave you a study at Cape Canaveral Air Force Station for free. And what did you do? You went out and did a contract, spent $200,000 to get the same thing you had already. All right. So much for government. After I did Cape Canaveral Air Force Station, all this went through some National Park System Advisory Board. National Park System Advisory Board and the Congress wrote back and said, well, this is nice, but we want a full theme study. We want to look at all the resources. Aha! There we go. Full theme study, all the resources. This is the Man in Space, the famous Man in Space, National Historic Landmark Theme Study. I traveled the country. I went to all the NASA sites. I went to all the launch facilities. I talked to everybody, and I put it in this report. And I traveled, I took the photographs, I typed it, I did everything myself. You can tell I did the cover too, because you can tell how bad the cover looks. Got this done in 9 months, and then we set it up through the system. And boy, did I run into battles with this. NASA and the Air Force did not like having their sites made National Historic Landmarks. They thought it would interfere with their ability to operate the sites. So the tradition in the space program was, when you finish with a launch pad, as soon as you finish with it, you go in and you salvage it. And I'm in the business of historic preservation. I don't want these things salvaged. I want them preserved. So we had battle after battle after battle on this. This went on for 2 or 3 years. And finally, it came to a head, and they were having a meeting of the National Park System Advisory Board where they were going to consider my study. And they met all over the country, but that year they were meeting on the Kona coast of Hawaii. And I'm thinking, great, I'm going to go to the Kona coast of Hawaii. So everybody was going to the Kona coast of Hawaii. And then it got up to the Secretary of the Interior, who said, I'm not sending 25 Park Service employees to the Kona coast of Hawaii. So the word came down to the director, came down to the associate director, came down to my boss and said, you got to cut out some people, that's too many people. So they looked over the list of 25 people. Who are we going to cut? They cut one person. Who did they cut? They cut Butowski. I said, wait a minute, this is the study the board is considering for my recommendations. And the Air Force was sending a whole airplane full of experts to argue with them. So I got cut. I couldn't go to the Kona coast of Hawaii. To this day, I've never been there. The meeting was on a Friday. Finally, on a Wednesday, my boss came to me and said, I talked to the people above, and they said you can go, but you have to leave on Thursday. You fly out there, you stay overnight Thursday night, you present your report Friday morning, and you come home Friday afternoon. And I said, no, thank you. So I didn't go. So I let I briefed, not my boss, but my boss's boss, I briefed him on the study, and he went out and he represented it to the board. And the board eventually adopted all of my recommendations, which was quite positive. I was really glad about that. Now, after that one went up, I started another study. I was interested in the subject of science. So along with the NASA study, I did one on American observatories. And I looked around the country to see which ones should be made National Historic Landmarks. Boy, if this raised a lot of protests, this raised a howl of protest. Astronomers are not friendly people. Did I ever tell you that? They're not friendly people. They didn't want their astronomical observatories made landmarks. Why? Well, because they thought it would interfere with your ability to operate and change the observatory and interfere with your ability to get government funding. So they showed up at the meeting and they presented a unanimous opposition to everything I said at the meeting. Not only that, they went over to the Congress. They got Congress to write an amendment into an Appropriations Act saying that the Park Service could not study scientific or technological facilities belonging to universities without the prior permission of the university. Now, they had the right of refusal already, but they strengthened that. Luckily, that provision was struck out of the law, but that didn't go into the law. Well, after this fiasco, we had to do another study, which I don't have here. I have all my slides. Called the Designation of Technological Facilities as National Historic Landmarks. And essentially that was a 120-page report that said that you could designate them. It wouldn't interfere with their operational facility, operation, and the guys didn't know what they were talking about. So that was another report we sent to the Congress. We got that out of the way. And then finally, Congress writes back and says, well, you've sent us all these reports, that's fine, but you didn't say which one you want to make a national park, because that was the whole purpose of all this, to go through all these facilities and determine which ones should be national parks. So, did another study. There we go. Man in Space, Study of Alternatives. And I looked at all the material I prepared here. I studied it here. I applied the criteria for national parks. I said the national park should be in Cape Canaveral, the Kennedy Space Center, on various sites, Kennedy Space Center. We sent that to the Congress. That goes to the Congress. So finally, after 7 or 8 years, all this goes to the Congress, and I get a note. They're holding hearings on all this and all my recommendations. And I got an invitation to go to the hearing. Now, the invitation shows up, 10 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday. The hearings are on a Wednesday. Now, I don't know if any of you work for the federal government, but if you're asked to testify before Congress and you're not a manager of an agency or anything, you just can't go over to those hearings. You got to get permission from your Legislative Affairs Office. So I went to the Legislative Affairs Office and I said, I've been asked to come over and to testify on all the material that I've done. Well, did that cause some problems back and forth and yes and no, and everybody's running around. So finally, about 4:30 or 5 o'clock, I'm still waiting around, and the word comes down from the Chief of Legislative Affairs and says, Harry, you've been asked to testify before the Committee on Interior and Insular Affairs Committee. We cannot tell you not to go, okay? But when you go over there, you can't say anything. What? No. Go over there and keep quiet. Don't say a word. So I said, well, that's useless. So I didn't go. So they held the hearings and I wasn't there. The end result of all this was that we never did get a national park dedicated to the American Space Program. I think I had a good recommendation here. And, it was just a lot of studies. Congress requests studies from the Park Service all the time. And most of the time you do the studies, you send it over, and you never hear anything at all. I used to joke and say that if we had a study concerning subject X, Y, and Z, all you needed to do was to go over to the stationery store, get a ream of paper, 500 sheets of paper, and type a title on the first page, and type something on the last page, bind it, and then send it off to the Congress with 498 blank pages. And that would satisfy them, because I don't think anybody ever looked at this. So we never did get a national park. However, since I've retired, a lot of the astronomical observatories have decided now they want to be National Historic Landmarks. I had a recommendation in this study as to a park in Southern California at the Lick Observatory, because it was not being supported by its university. It was on Forest Service land. It would make a wonderful astronomy National Historic Park. They fought me. I never got anywhere with that. In any case, all these astronomical observatories now want to be made national parks. I'm now retired, and I've told the Park Service that I took an oath, after I finish this study, I will never again in the rest of my life ever set foot on an observatory, and the hell with all of them. So they're not getting anywhere. They're not getting anywhere. And I find it funny, I went to a meeting out in California about 3 or 4 months ago, where a radio observatory in West Virginia wanted to be made a national park. Now, I don't have any hostility toward that site. I visited the site. I think it would make a good national park. But they have a big committee, and they're all there, and they're all meeting and doing all sorts of things, but they don't know what they're doing. They don't know how to make national parks. They don't know what the process is. They don't know what the study process is. They don't realize how they have to enlist state and local officials. Nobody knows. I know, but nobody asked me. I would help them, but Mount Palomar, go to hell. That's all I can say about Mount Palomar. All right, now. History of spaceflight, basic review. You all remember Sputnik?
Yeah.
Well, wasn't that a shock?
1957.
1957. The Russians put up a satellite. How did they ever do that? These are guys that didn't know their left foot from their right foot. And they put up a satellite, and if they put up a satellite, that meant that they had an ICBM. If they had an ICBM, they could drop an atomic bomb on the United States. So, this set off a space race. Boy, do I remember that. Okay, Sputnik 1, the former Soviet Union, October 57, the world's first artificial satellite, beginning of the space race. It was 187 pounds. It was a massive satellite. It didn't do anything. It just went around the world, went beep, 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 beep. We launched Vanguard right after this went up. Vanguard blew up. Eventually, we got Explorer 1 up there under von Braun. Von Braun was using a Jupiter C rocket. And the Explorer 1 satellite was 30 pounds, discovered the Van Allen radiation belts. So the space race, right from the very beginning, between the United States and the Soviet Union, was going to be an intense affair. They had better rockets, they could launch heavier satellites, but I think we had better technology. All right, April 1961, the first human to orbit the Earth, Yuri Gagarin, went around 108 minutes. And while they were orbiting Yuri Gagarin, who do we orbit? Ham. Okay, that was Chip was the first one went up there. But eventually we got Project Mercury. These are the Mercury astronauts, April 1959, mission to send one American into outer space. There have been several movies made on the Mercury astronauts that I highly recommend. The best movie was made about 25 years ago. It's called The Right Stuff. And if you haven't seen it, I recommend you go see it. All
The book
right.
was better.
What was that?
The book was better.
The book is excellent. Okay, here are the Mercury 7 astronauts. When they were picking the astronauts, they picked test pilots. These are all test pilots. They were fighter pilots in Korea, one or two of them in the Second World War. Interesting thing to note is that there are no women in this group. And there are a lot of women who are flying airplanes and jet airplanes who wanted to apply for the program. And the head of NASA said, no, we don't want any women. And then they insisted, and then they said, let us take the test. So they gave these same tests to several women. One of them was Jackie Cochran, and she took the test and she scored better than all the Mercury astronauts. But the head of NASA next to her and said she couldn't be in the program. This was in the days before women could apply for things like this. Alan Shepard, first American in outer space, spacecraft Freedom 7. He was launched on a Redstone rocket. It had enough power to push him into a suborbital flight. Go down range about 160 miles. Couldn't go into orbit. Alan Shepard was also the only Mercury astronaut who eventually went to the moon. He took one of the later Apollo flights to the moon. And while everybody was complaining about the cost of the Apollo flights, and do we really need them, what's Alan Shepard doing on the moon? He brought a golf ball with him. And he drops it on the surface of the moon, and he's playing golf. Well, that did a lot for the public image of NASA. All right. Here's the capsule that Alan Shepard used. Here's his rocket, the Redstone rocket. This would just go up 160 miles, then would plop down into the ocean. A helicopter would come, pick them out of the ocean, and take them back. And he had to get a great reception. By the time the third or fourth man went up, they weren't getting any receptions at all. All right, here's the capsule being picked up. But the most famous Mercury astronaut was John Glenn. John Glenn, because he was the first one to orbit the Earth. He was supposed to orbit for nine times. He only orbited 3 times because while they were going around, there was an indicator light saying that his heat shield had slipped off. Not a good idea to be in orbit without a heat shield, because when you come back, you're going to burn up. So what they decided to do was to keep the retro pack on, not jettison the retro pack when it fired, and then they would bring him back and let the retro pack hold on the heat shield. Well, he got home, and he got home safely. If you've ever been to the Air and Space Museum, I recommend you look into these capsules. They are small. You get claustrophobia sitting in these capsules. All right, so that was John Glenn. Here's John Glenn in the capsule. This is John Glenn. In later years, John Glenn, about 20 years ago, went up in the space shuttle. Took a ride in the space shuttle. Did very well. Apparently, the only problem was he complained that they didn't have Tang on the space shuttle. All right, another famous Mercury astronaut was Gus Grissom. He went up on his flight, and on his flight, when the capsule landed, the entrance hatch blew off, and water came in. Well, he managed to get out of the capsule, but they lost the capsule. And a lot of people said that was Grissom's fault. He pushed the wrong button. He blew the door. Grissom is very sad. In 1967, he was slated for the Apollo 1, the first Apollo flight. And while he was on the launch pad, there was a fire on the Apollo capsule. And Gus Grissom, died along with Chaffee and another astronaut. All right, that was Gus Grissom. Here, it's Gus Grissom being picked up from the ocean without his capsule. After Mercury, you had Project Gemini sending 2 men up, and they were launched on a Titan rocket. The purpose of this was to stay up in space longer, 2 weeks, and to practice rendezvous and docking. We're going to go to the moon, and it had been decided they were going to have 2 spaceships up there, lunar lander, landing module, and the Apollo Command Module. They had the rendezvous in Tom